Welcome back to Community Conversations. I'm your host, Steve Mantis, and my guest today is Randy Nelsen, Professor Emeritus at Lakehead University. So Randy, we've been talking a little bit about your book, Degrees of Failure.
Mm-hmm.
Now, have things changed? Like you and I are both more or less of that age where we've been around now for 50 years or whatever, seeing our education system. Is this different than it was 50 years ago, or is this a continual problem?
There's a history to it, for sure. I think there's been the corporatization of the university, but a lot of people think this is a recent thing. In my PhD work, I studied the growth and development of colleges and universities in the United States, and I went way back into the 1800s and the late 1700s. And there we find philanthropic gifts to universities from wealthy people that actually corporatized the university. So that in the mid-1800s, when it used to be knowledge for knowledge's sake, all of a sudden it got defined as knowledge has to be useful. So it has to be used in some ways so that are important to the economy. So that these corporate donors and the individual philanthropists, they would give money to engineering schools, business schools, teaching accounting, bookkeeping, so forth, because these were practical arts. And gradually, because of their donations, the presidents of these American universities, and the similar thing happened in Canada, grew to become dependent on these donations, and they changed their tune a lot. It wasn't just maybe somebody had there's the presidents who had 40-year reigns there as presidents of universities. And in one case, the president of Dartmouth started out talking about scientific work, scholarship, and so forth. And by the end of it, he was talking about education in the practical arts because people had donated to his university and built up engineering schools and the like. And so knowledge is useful became the mantra sort of in universities. So this corporatization goes way back, like we could talk about the last 200, 250 years. So it's not a recent phenomenon. And the university's become a business. With all that that means. It means that attention to the bottom line, efficiencies, online learning, which may be cheaper. Some people, there's an argument now in the literature about whether it is actually cheaper than in-class instruction. But certainly the business focus of the current university has changed, and it's developed and become more refined from the time in the 60s when you and I were going to university, I assume. And there is a business orientation that I think is quite harmful. A lot of this has to do with research funding for professors too. After all, they're going to go where the funds are. And so you have to tailor your research projects so that you have a chance of getting those grants from the government. And the government has cut back on the amount that they're putting into Canadian universities. When I first came to Lakehead in the 70s, some 80%, low 80s of the funding was government. Right now,
so that was public education.
Public
That's what
education,
we thought. The
exactly.
government said, let's educate our
It was
our
public
populace.
education, absolutely. Now, that figure has gone down to 42, 43% that the government's putting in. The rest is tuition. The rest is endowment, funding from benefactors, philanthropists, corporate benefactors, and of course grants are pushing the thing because research funding is how you get promoted. It's not only research and publication, it's the amount of money you can raise for the university.
Right.
So that is the kind of role model that professors are setting up for students in a way. That's why a parking spot's so important, because the profs zip in and out of their parking spot to go to their other arrangements and to serve their grants. And the students are doing the same thing because tuition is going up. They've got a lot of part-time work to do and part-time jobs, so they kind of drop into the learning boutique. And if they have a parking spot that's available, that's good, because then they can drop back out quickly and get away from the university. So I talk in the book, in the first chapter, I started with parking. And I talk a lot about the commuter universities. And I compare McMaster, York, and Lakehead, which have all become commuter universities. And the technology fits in here too, because why even come to the university if you can get most of your classes online, you know?
Well, coming back to the point of the online compared to the in class,
person,
like
yeah.
my best memories from my university days were the small classes where we would discuss the books we were reading.
Yeah.
And that really engaged me. And,
Yep.
and even yesterday I did a webinar, a 3-hour webinar on an issue that I'm keen to, but at the same time I'm playing on my email, not playing, I'm doing my work on
Yeah.
my email.
Yeah.
You know, I'm reading some other stuff, and so I'm not catching everything that's going on.
That's right.
But in those discussion groups, I was 100% there.
Yeah.
And to me, that meant a lot more was going into my head for that amount of time than in the online stuff.
That's right. I don't think there's anything like studying under a fired up professor who's there in person and who's read the material and is reading along with you. But the students have got to get there too. They've got to do the reading. And I think also the online education and the technology plays a very significant role here, and there are distractions. I mean, there's distractions for the profs too. I mean, to be fair, I think the profs are the privileged group at the university, but at the same time, the role models they're giving students, it's kind of a strange role model in a way, because teaching is not always emphasized. Research is. And yet, a lot of people think that what goes on in the university, it's all about education and teaching, but it's really all about research and raising money. You've got to finance the project. And so again, the business end of it comes in. A lot of times students will get shortchanged. If you're a prof and you only have a limited number of hours and you have work to do on your research grant and you want to publish, not necessarily perish, you want to publish so you can get that next promotion, you might not give as much time to your classroom preparation as you otherwise would. So,
Randy, we're running out of time. I wish we had another hour to chat about this stuff, but you're just coming out with a book.
Yep.
The Degrees of Failure. We're going to put that up on the screen. People can access it through any means.
That's a book.
But if they want to get back to you, we'll put your email on the screen.
Okay.
And I want to thank you so much for coming on the program.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
And I want to invite folks to send your feedback on our Facebook page, Community Conversations, any suggestions or advice on the future. Thank you so much, and stay safe.